we're, the whole group, I think you're kind of taking something out of context, because we usually work so hard to make sure that she said, no, I don't care about that. You can't do that anymore. I said, okay. So if I say something questionable, please question me.
Okay. Well, I mean, that I guess is probably a good point or a good place to start then. I mean, so it seems like everybody's very, very afraid at this point of, what you say getting taken not just out of context, because that's an easy thing to do, right? You can take anything out of context and you can make an article out of it, I suppose. But in today's current environment, you've got so much happening with like fast-paced news, and probably at the head of that, you've got Twitter, and then close behind, you've got every other form of social media. But you can take something that somebody said, just put it in quotes, and then you've immediately got an inflammatory, clickbaity type article that somebody's going to want to click on. And, then after that, you've got them in your little sort of circle of news giving. And then you can not just spin it, but you can take your narrative, which is sort of the big word I think we want to talk about today, and make that be, just spin it so that it fits what the message is that you're trying to put out into the world. But below that, there's the whole concept of what's the point of giving somebody news? I mean, is it to give somebody what you think, or is it to give somebody what actually happened? And all we want is what actually happened. I think most people do, but then again, you're going to pick stuff that fits your own personal narrative and biases too. So this whole concept of like narrative, the more I get into recording and giving people news type stuff, I kind of tend to shy away from the commodity news. But when I pick who gets to, and people want to come on my show, or I want to get somebody on my show, I'm always kind of struggling with what is it? Why would I have this person on here? Is it just because people I think would get a lot out of it, or is there some underlying bias other than let's share the joy of flying together, right? But that's easy for me to say because I'm a podcaster in a small niche. But for somebody like yourself who writes for larger publications and has for a long time, or for the biggest of the big publications like the New York Times, no matter what you say is going to get taken in a certain way, but we know that those publications have their own leanings, left, right, or otherwise. And it sort of is making my head spin. I don't know about you as a pro journalist, but what are your thoughts on where we are with like narrative right now, just in the current state of life, especially with the pandemic and an upcoming election?
That's quite a long first question, I think.
Just like two sentences, like Twitter. Just give me the Twitter answer. I'm kidding.
No, well, that's a good point. I think when we write something like our e-news at Flying, it is just, as you spoke about earlier, it's about the news. What happened? Where, who, what, where, when, and why. And in terms of narrative, the only story that I think I try to add to any of the news that I write about is a perspective, because based on experience. Oh, I have flown that airplane, or I have traveled to that location, or I have experienced very similar circumstances, and I learned this or that. And you try to integrate that into the story to give people a little perspective. And I think that's part of our job. But now, as to whether we should be editorializing or doing marketing speak, this GPS obviously is pretty old, and it doesn't have all the new bells and whistles, and it's not near as cool as that GPS that's WAS approved and does this, that, or whatever. That's questionable, because are you basing those opinions on your experience or your own particular likes and dislikes? That really doesn't have any place in a news story. Again, to me, the only narrative I can see in those kinds of short news blurbs, again, is personal experience that adds something to the story, that it helps flesh it out a little bit. But short of that, there shouldn't be any. except that, in the Barry Weiss story that you mentioned, what she was finding even at the New York Times, and as you said earlier, there are a lot of people who go, oh, well, the New York, what does Rush Limbaugh call it? I think the New York slime or something. But, each side has a different opinion on their own particular media. There are folks that don't like the way Fox News portrays information as well. Well, now you're slipping into, am I writing this because it's a good story and I want my readers or my listeners to understand it? Or am I giving them this perspective because I want to make sure they really share it? And that they'll pass it around and say, wow, this is really good, and share this with your friends, and because I want a lot of clicks. Maybe because our publication is compensated per click, or I just want to make myself feel important, or whatever. And that's where it gets into some pretty gray areas. And that was why Barry Weiss said she was leaving the New York Times a few weeks ago. She realized that she could not tell if the story was being portrayed on social media and took off that way, or if social media was being fed with a kind of story that was certain to make the click meters click. And I think we see that kind of thing all the time. If you follow Twitter or Facebook or any of that, you'll see headlines. You go, oh, wait a minute. Brooke Shields, you should see what she looks like now. You go, wow, yeah, I want, because for those of us that remember what she looked like when she was young, what do you expect? You go, okay, it's a little voyeuristic, but maybe I'll click on it and see. And then it's some ridiculous story that has to do with her earrings or something like that. And you go, oh, man, I was suckered. And there's a lot of that kind of thing right now. And I think that's why so many people are, honestly, I don't even follow as much social media as I used to, because it just doesn't tell me that much. And I don't care about some guy's opinion in Portland, Oregon, that knows nothing about the TBM 940. And just says, oh, it's too expensive and it's too busy and it's too difficult to fly, and who wants a piece of junk like that? Well, who cares what he thinks? You know what I mean? But then people promote things like that depending on the headline, depending on the photo, and to mention narrative too, the photos that people choose for their posts, most of the time they're violating copyrights because they just grab something off the internet, and it looks very salacious with an interesting headline, and people click on it, and halfway through they go, this is a waste of time. This is all baloney. So then what do you believe? And how can you believe? That's a problem.
Yeah, well, I guess now one of the cool things that we have with social media, and particularly Twitter, is that you can share news rapidly. Like, you see an article you want to share, copy, paste, boom, it puts a thumbnail up and all that stuff from that person's article. It simply just shares it. And then guess what? It direct hits to that person's website. They're stoked. The news got out the end, and it happened 30 seconds ago, which is cool, right? And plus, it's not, one of the old, long-standing, I guess they get accused of being a little on the lefty kind of, liberal media sites and so on. But at the same time, the fact that you can do that means that anybody can just sling false information with a speed so quick that there's absolutely no amount of journalistic integrity process that can be applied to it. It's just, I saw this, boom, it's out in the world. And if you're popular enough, millions of people could see your tweet. And what you just shared is bunk, right?
That's absolutely true. And I think I've heard this said many times over the last few years. Oh, how can people tell if it's true or not? It sounds it sounds true if they say something about the president who they may not like, or something about the Speaker of the House who they don't like, and they say, "Oh, I always knew she was like that." That makes, I mean, so some of this stuff really feeds into the narrative that people have created in their brains anyway, and it just supports it, and people go, "Yeah, I believe that." Well, but I think people have gotten lazy with social media. I really do. When people send me things, when people send me stories, I always say, "Well, wait a minute, where did this come from? What's the source on this?" And it's not just because I am a journalist. I mean, my daughter's 25. She's not a journalist, but when she sees things, that's the first thing she asks is, "Oh, wait a minute. All right, where did this come from?" Because that gives you an awful lot of information right there. But I think people are, again, I think many people have gotten lazy. They don't want to check the source. They're just so excited about the fact that this is supporting somebody they really care about, or denigrating somebody they can't stand. They just take it and go with it.
Okay, well, I mean, okay, so do you think then, you gave the example of your daughter, which is, it's great. She's not a journalist, but guess what? What's the source on this? Where does information come from? That's just good critical thinking skills, if you ask me. I mean, everybody should think that way. I think that's great. So, but I guess the thing is, now that you can get so much information so quickly, so rapidly from so many different sources with widely varying narratives from extreme left to extreme right and everything in between, at least politically, do you think that that's making the general population's critical thinking skills better because we know that, or worse because at this point it causes so much strife to try to figure all that out that sometimes you just accept it?
Oh, I think it's probably more the latter. I think that critical thinking skills, at least in my experience, have fallen far short of not just what I expect, because I don't want to sound like I'm being a perfectionist, but I think critical thinking skills have fallen far short of what I grew up becoming used to. It's that ability to say, well, if this happens, then that's going to be the result. Okay, but, okay, that's easy. But if that happens and that's the result, where is that going to put us in 5 minutes? Oh my gosh, we've got to be thinking about this other problem that's going to lead to. And people don't do that. They just want to know, is this the truth or not? Does this make sense? Oh, yeah, because, again, I don't think that Democrat is worth a hill of beans, or that Republican or that independent is goofy anyway. And, again, I think it's much easier to simply feed the narrative you created in your own brain. And that's what I think we're up against in our election process now. I'm old enough to remember some old politicians, the Daniel Patrick Moynihans that were known for reaching across the aisle because their job was to get the job done, not just to win. And it's not like that anymore. Now it's all about winning. And if I get more clicks on my post than you do, then I'm better than you are. And I think that has become kind of the perspective of a lot of people. And they read blogs and newspapers and watch telly and all that for people that give them the opinion that they want to hear. And they don't say, wow, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why would this person do that? Well, I don't need to worry about that because I got it from CNN or Fox or ABC or whatever. I don't have to question it. They're right, so, and leave it at that. But I think we also eliminate we ignore the fact that sometimes reporters make mistakes. I think, and that happens as well. I think we all try very hard not to make mistakes, but it happens. But again, I think all of social media is feeding what everybody does. There's no sense in writing about that story. No one's going to really care about it unless we can get this kind of, perspective on it. This salacious fact or something. So again, it's, is it the tail wagging the dog? I think it very much has become that.
Yeah, well, let me give you an example of one I saw recently that it still, frankly, kind of bothers me every time I think about it. But remember a couple of weeks ago, there was that group of doctors. One of them was a woman, and she was up there just going on this tirade about how hydroxychloroquine is the solution to everybody's problems right now, right? And everybody on the right that I know was sharing that is like, yes, that's exactly right. Trump's been saying that for months now. Hydroxychloroquine is, in fact, the solution, that plus the Z-Pack and whatever. And that's it. We don't need masks. We don't need social distancing. We've got the solution. Here it is. It's hydroxychloroquine. I'm a doctor. I do this in the ER all day long. Boom, the end, right? And it got millions of views. And then Facebook took it down, right? So everybody on the right's sitting here thinking, this woman's telling the truth, and the awful super left-wing Facebook people are taking it down to spread their narrative. And then on the other hand, Facebook's sitting there going like, excuse me, this is disinformation because there's all these tests and all this medical information that says that it is not the solution, and maybe it helps a little, maybe it doesn't, but it sure as heck isn't the cure. So this violates our company policy of spreading disinformation, and that's our effort to try to, because again, you could use Facebook in the same way to sling news real fast, correct or not. But this is our way of trying to say, hey, it would be unethical for us to allow this to occur on our platform. But the thing is, somebody here is really, really wrong, but nobody can figure it out. And that's kind of the part that blows my mind is, on one hand, if that drug were in fact the solution, right? And it would just be that simple, and the world is literally falling apart all around us, and one simple drug will fix it. Okay, somebody's got a lot of explaining to do. But then on the other hand, if it doesn't work, like they're saying, and people are spreading this news like, hey, go out and do whatever you want because you can just take this drug and it's cool now, that will kill untold numbers of people, right? So somebody is very, very, very wrong. But who in the news is going to be able to actually discern who that is, let alone the person on the receiving end of that news? That video really made a big stink. And every time I think about it now, I still get a little upset because it's like where it came to a point where nobody knows what's going on. And that is how politicized this has become, right? And I swore I'd quit talking about COVID on the podcast, and I'm not trying to. This is about the news part. But, I mean, what do you think about that whole situation? I mean, what's somebody to do?
I think it takes work. And I think at this particular time, I think people on both sides are playing the exhaustion card. They know that the American people are just so tired of the politics that we've seen over the last 4 years. And then there was the COVID virus and the fact that the economy tanked. And you throw all that in there and they go, I don't know, whatever. Yeah, sure. But I think if anything, now people need to be even more vigilant over the next few months until the election is completed, and question what they're seeing and what they're hearing. But again, that takes work. And when you have so many people that are out of work, that have lost their health care, that have can't feed their families, it's a little hard to say you should be focusing on whatever the narrative is that the organization is trying to sell you, and people just feel like they don't have the energy. And again, I think that works into some people's strategy easily. They can say things and people go, yeah, okay, whatever. Of course, going back to what we started with about trade magazines, you can't get away with that in a trade publication, because the readers of flying or yachting or popular science or working mother or whatever. These people are experts. They are really a niche audience that really understands that particular segment of the marketplace. And, if you were to say something that was absolutely silly to the audience of working mother, I mean, the editor's email or telephone would probably light up very quickly. But in the general media, that's a different story. I mean, everybody's not a rocket scientist, and again, you have people that say, well, the Wall Street Journal said this. I mean, yeah, but does it make sense? And I know we keep harping on that, but there's no other. I think it's like maintaining a democracy. There's no easy way to do it. Sometimes you just have to fight back, and people are. Again, I think some of them are spoiled. I think some of them are lazy. I think some of them are tired. They're worn out. Again, they're trying to put food on the table and they don't have time. So there are lots of reasons. But the point is that if we continue to slip, at least the way it looks like we're doing to me, it does not bode well for the future.
Yeah. I think so too. Plus, I mean, you're getting hit from every angle all the time. So eventually you're kind of like, I'm just going to stay in my lane on this or whatever. Like I don't know what else to do. You'd have to spend all day long trying to sift through different media sources to try to find out what the real story is. And even then you're sifting through media sources that are biased in their own ways.
Well, that's true. And I can only speak for me, but I know that a lot of people, as I said, are a little lazy. Myself, I like to listen to people from the opposite side. I mean, we watched all of the DNC this week, and I told my daughter, I said, but I want to watch the RNC next week. I want to see how they cope with essentially the same kind of problems the rest of us are. The fact that the virus is out of control, the fact that the economy sucks, that people are very unhappy with how the United States position in the world. I want to hear how they're going to address those issues. Not so that I can say, oh, well, they're full of it. That's so. But I want to hear what their perspective is. And I think that's the way I was trained in J school. I want to hear both sides, even if I don't like them.
I mean, do you think that's just your personality not because journalism school taught you that, but you went to journalism school because of that?
It's an interesting thought. I've always been a very curious person, and I think I don't want to say that I'm a cynic because I'm not, but I do question things when somehow it just doesn't land right. And I will tell people, okay, I may be crazy, but this doesn't make any sense to me. And I'll make somebody explain it to me. Sometimes they can explain, and I go, oh, okay, I didn't understand that aspect of this. Or after 5 minutes, I go, I'm sorry, it still doesn't make any sense to me. Why would this person do this or say that? What's their motivation? So I think maybe it's the journalist in me, but also the wannabe fiction writer in me too, somewhere, where I go, if you don't make it plausible to the reader, you can't just throw anything at them. The reader has got to say, okay, there's a reason this person's doing it. I see why they're doing that. Okay, that makes sense because it carries the story along. So maybe it's that. I don't know. What do I know? I can't even hold a job, right? I mean, I just so.
Well, check this out. Here's something I heard somewhere else that is completely unrelated, yet probably maybe very related. I don't know. But there's a guy I was listening to named Dr. Paul Chek, and he does a lot of work when it comes to sort of, enlightenment type things and, getting your conscious in the right state of mind and things like that. And
Did he mention my name?
It did come up once or twice, actually. I told him to be nice less time and use less profanity. Okay. Anyway, he said, and before, people click this off and be like, oh, great, here we go with the Enlightenment talk. One of the things he said that I thought was really neat was, some people, and you can usually figure this out within a few minutes of talking to somebody, some people have just not reached an adult state of consciousness. And that can mean a lot of different things. But I felt that when he said that, and that's not an expression I use often, but I felt that. I was like, oh, ding, 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 light bulb. Okay, here we are. That makes so much sense, especially in the way that news is slung around right now. And this is one of the first things I actually thought about. And not because somebody disagrees or whatever, but quite the opposite. And I think this is what you just touched on was somebody who has an adult state of consciousness, I think would, even despite the fact that they're tired of hearing so many different opposing views and all that, is still interested in hearing what the other side says, not because, better yet, not because they want to get pissed off about it, but because, or to laugh at them or whatever, but because it's just an honest, like, how are you guys going to address this, right? What are we going to do here? Practically, pragmatically, what is your take on this? Because there could be something I'm missing, or maybe not. But I actually want to hear the opposing view on why these things are the way they are. But in the same second, I'm sitting here thinking, for everybody who's getting their news on social media and all that other stuff, I think, and people say this all day long, this is not new news. I think the thing that social media kills is that adult-like state of consciousness. So when you're getting Twitter-slung news that's been shared and twisted and obviously supports somebody's narrative and so on, it does something to your brain where you suddenly lose that ability to have an adult-like state of consciousness and want to hear the other side or want to look more into this. It's just, boom, there's your quick fix right into the veins answer. Go search for more if you want, but it's probably not going to offer you the opposing viewpoint in that story. And it's just going to give you a whole bunch of clickbaity other things you could click on to support this narrative more, right? And I think that's sort of like the final part of this racket or this circle where on one hand, being able to sling news real fast is pretty cool. But on the other hand, doing it through social media in a iPhone-addicted society is like killing this ability that we have to be in an adult-like state of consciousness and actually rationalize through this information. And it just becomes easier to just buy the narrative of whoever you're hearing it from. At least that's kind of what I think.
I do think it's hard for people in some sense because what we've taught people over the last 20 years since the first blogs started to appear after the turn of the century, maybe, that anybody can be a journalist. You're a citizen journalist. And now you can tell the world about your perspective on whatever, on hot cars, on great food, or politics that you love or that you hate, or whatever. But realize that the people that are actual journalists, which of course many are starving right now because all the publications keep closing down because they were so dependent on advertising. These people have been trained since day one to be somewhat skeptical of what they hear and to want to dig a little bit to make sure that the story they're presenting to their readers is actually not just true, but it is useful. And I don't think you can do that when you have people that simply say, well, I saw this post on Twitter and wow, look, it's got how many likes or whatever, or retweets, or I was watching a particular person's Twitter feed the other day, and I was watching the numbers change by a dozen every 2 seconds as I was watching it. And I thought, wow. I mean, this was the retweets. And I thought, okay, these people aren't really thinking about whether this person's statement made a whole lot of sense in the general world. They're just going, oh, yeah, I love that. I love it. I love it. I want everybody I know to know that I believe this. Okay. And I think I think we've really lost touch with that adult reality that we used to think everybody had. I mean, how many times in the last 3 or 4 years have you heard somebody say, "Oh, when are they going to have an adult in the room?" Or even when you were younger, somebody'd say, "Oh, come on, Brandon, grow up. Where have you been? This is the way the world works." And part of you says, "Wow, I guess I didn't know that." Or, "No, that's baloney. I don't believe that. I don't believe that people need to be poor or just because they're poor, they're lazy, or I mean, that's just the way it is, that there's going to be a percentage of the world that owns everything and the rest of us just slop in the mud for the no, it doesn't have to be like that. But I mean, we go back and look at where we were 250 years ago, back before the American Revolution. There were people saying, that'll never work. Are you kidding? The British will send in troops. They'll annihilate all of us. And what are we going to have then? We've got a pretty nice life here. They don't fuss with us that much. Just leave it alone. It's just fine. Well, thank goodness for all of us. There were a whole lot of people that said, no, I'm not going to settle for that. I don't want life to look like that. And let's face it, we saw that 100 years later during the Civil War here in the States, where people said, look, slavery's the way it's always been. It just is, and, it is what it is. And people said, no, it's not right. But those people are always in a minority, I think. And how that happened, how that all kind of shakes out this time around, I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, luckily for us, so we operate in this little bubble of aviation, and you alluded to it earlier that it's more of a technical pursuit, right? It's less political, less heated, less opinion based, and more, I guess, just easier by nature to be factual about the things. Here's the climb performance of this new jet, or here are the improvements over the last version, or whatever. And well, I guess you could, like you said in your example, say, hey, well, this GPS is clearly superior to the other one because it has blank and blank. But you have to go out of your way to do that. It doesn't lend itself to that. You would have to be like, oh, now I'm going to editorialize, as opposed to give the information, which in something so technical, there's a wealth of things you can write about just in the facts, right? So do you think that we could learn something from the more social media, Twittery, busy sort of way of doing things? Or do you think they could learn something more from the technical writers and be like, hey, let's try to stay factual? I mean, what do you think we could do there?
That's a tough one, because I think, we see letters to the editor come in on stories, and there are certainly times on feature stories where a writer will editorialize somewhat, and I think most publications give trade writers a little leeway there, because they say this person has a pretty good knowledge base to be able to say this about that concept or that product or that outcome. But in the real world, I still go back to the fact that even if we thought we could do it before the pandemic, I think now it's going to be even harder, because people are just so exhausted, and people on both sides are kind of counting on that in to support them or deny them something. So that's why I really believe that I tell everybody the same thing. I don't care what side you vote for, but on November 3rd, get your butt out there and vote, because it does count. And we saw that last time, that the entire direction of the world can change based on those 50, 100, 200,000 people around the country that just said, my vote doesn't matter. Who cares? No one's going to listen to me anyway. But it really did make a big difference. And unless we want to see it go down that road again, in either side, we've got to stand up and make our vote count, make our voices heard.